Good morning, grade 5. This is Ms Sara Nafal, and this is a comprehension lesson in which we will be reading a fable called The Boy Who Cried Wolf. The objectives of the lesson are to define new vocabulary, to read The Boy Who Cried Wolf, to take a closer look at the fable by analyzing it, to answer comprehension questions, and briefly discuss point of view. Let's look at the vocabulary. He took a deep breath and bellowed, "Wolf, wolf." Bellow is a verb and it's the act of emitting a loud animal-like cry or scream. The villagers immediately came scrambling up the hill. Scramble is a verb and it's to climb or move quickly on rough terrain. The shepherd saw a real wolf prowling close to the sheep. Prowl is a verb and it's the act of creeping about in search of prey. He leapt to his feet and wailed as loudly as he could. Wail is a verb and it's to make a long, mournful or sad cry, usually high pitch. An old man consoled the boy. Console is a verb and it's the act of comforting or lessening the grief of someone. Now let's move on to reading the text. Please pause the video, read the first part of the text, and then play the video again. Now that you have read the first part, go on to reading the next part, pause the video, read, and then continue the video again. After reading this fable, we know that it's a fable because the writer makes sure to state the moral lesson at the end of his story. And in this fable, the moral lesson is that a liar cannot be trusted even when he is telling the truth. Now let's analyze our fable here. We're going to take a look at the opening of the fable. We're going to take a look at the usage of dialogue, usage of paragraphs, adverbs, and adjectives. Now, the opening of the fable. Here the writer starts with, "There was once." And then he introduces one of the characters, which is a shepherd boy. And then he also includes the setting of the story, which is on the hillside. Make sure that at the beginning of your story, you have to introduce your character or one of the characters and the setting. Moving on to the dialogue. The writer makes use of dialogue here when he says, "Wolf, wolf." The wolf is chasing the sheep. Here the shepherd is the one who speaks. And we know this is speech because the writer uses speech marks at the beginning and ending of the speech. He also uses speech in "Don't cry wolf" when there is no wolf. And then this is followed by the speaker who are the villagers. We also have usage of speech in the repetition of the first speech and again. And in each speech, the writer makes sure to add inverted commas or speech marks before and after each speech. So please make sure that you write this. Okay, moving on to the paragraphs. The fable here is divided into paragraphs. We have the first paragraph, second paragraph, and third paragraph, and so on. And also, the writer starts his new paragraph when time changes. So here we have in the second paragraph, you have later that morning. This means that there is a shift in time. And then in the third paragraph, he says that afternoon, which is again changing time. That's why he changes the paragraph with the changing of time. Now let's look at the adverbs. The writer uses adverbs, both adverbs and adjectives, in order to make the descriptions clearer for the writer, to make his writing lively, or it seems lively. Some adverbs used are slowly, suddenly, immediately, very, sternly, loudly. So these are the adverbs used. Now let's move on to the adjectives, which also contribute to the description of the story, and it makes it more interesting. Some adjectives used are bored, deep, fast, bored again, wicked, cross, real, and alarmed. Try to use as much as you can adverbs in your own writing. Now let's move on to the comprehension. We have 4 questions here. I'd like you to read them. Pause the video, read them, answer them in a separate sheet, and then play the video again. Now that you've read and answered the questions, let's take a look at the answers. First question. Why did the boy call to the rest of the villagers one morning? The boy called to the rest of the villagers because he was bored watching the sheep and wanted to have some fun. The second question. In the extract, it is written that the villagers had faces as red as ripe tomatoes. This is an example of figurative language. Is the technique used here a simile, alliteration, or metaphor? And then suggest 2 reasons why the villagers' faces are so red. Faces as red as ripe tomatoes is an example of a simile. And here the villagers' faces might be so red because they are so angry or because they are so hot from rushing up the hill. Let me remind you that similes always compare one thing to another. The third question says, why did the villagers not come when the boy asked for help in the afternoon? The villagers did not come when the boy asked for help in the afternoon because they thought it was another of his tricks. Number 4. What is the moral point of this story? And for what reason was it written? This story has a moral lesson, which is if you keep on lying, no one will ever believe you, even when you are telling the truth. Now let's move on to the final point, which is the point of view. Let me remind you that we have 3 points of view. First person, which uses I and we. The second person uses you. And the third person uses he, she, it, and they. Usually, fiction is written either in the first person or in the third person. Now, from whose point of view is the story told? A narrator, it's told from a narrator's point of view. And this narrator is removed from the action and is not part of it. The story is not told from one of the characters in the story. The story is told by a narrator, and this narrator is not one of the characters. And in this case, we call it the third person narrator or narration. Third person point of view. Now, how do you know? We usually know because in the third person, we don't know what the characters are thinking. we don't see the action from the character's point of view or one of the characters' point of view. And in this case, again, this is the third person. And this fable is in the third person. And that's all for today's lesson. Thank you, stay safe and stay positive.